Emma Rodriguez pressed her face against the cool glass of Sweet Dreams Bakery, watching the elegant birthday cakes displayed like precious jewels under the warm fluorescent lights. Her breath fogged the window as she counted the crumpled dollar bills in her small hands once more. $10. That was all she had managed to save from her part-time job, helping Mrs. Chun with grocery deliveries after school. Tomorrow was her mother's 38th birthday, and Emma desperately wanted to surprise her with something special. Maria Rodriguez had been working double shifts at the diner for the past 6 months, ever since Emma's father had left them with nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. The dark circles under her mother's eyes seemed to grow deeper each day, and Emma rarely saw her smile anymore except when she thought Emma wasn't looking. The smallest cake in the display case cost $15. Emma had asked the baker, Mr. Peterson, if he would consider a payment plan, but he had shaken his head sympathetically. Business was business, he had explained, and he couldn't afford to extend credit, even to a girl he had watched grow up in the neighborhood. As Emma stood there, fighting back tears of frustration, she didn't notice the sleek black sedan that pulled up to the curb behind her. The car was so quiet that its arrival went unnoticed by the few people walking along the sidewalk of Maple Street, the modest commercial strip that served their working-class neighborhood. The driver stepped out first, a tall man in a crisp uniform who moved with military precision. He opened the rear door, and another man emerged. This second man was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and an expensive navy coat that probably cost more than Emma's family spent on groceries in 3 months. His movements were deliberate and careful, as if he carried the weight of important decisions wherever he went. Thomas Whitman had not intended to stop in this neighborhood. His usual route from his downtown office to his estate in the hills took him along the highway, far from the modest shops and small apartments that lined these streets. But today, his driver had taken a detour to avoid construction, and something about the scene before him had made Thomas ask his driver to stop. He watched the young girl standing before the bakery window, her shoulders hunched with disappointment. There was something achingly familiar about her posture, the way she held herself as if trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. It reminded him of another child from long ago, a boy who had once pressed his face against shop windows, dreaming of things that seemed forever out of reach. Emma finally turned away from the bakery, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She nearly collided with Thomas, who had approached so quietly she hadn't heard him. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping back and looking up at him with wide, startled eyes. She took in his expensive clothes and immediately felt self-conscious about her own appearance. Her jeans had a small hole in the knee, carefully mended by her mother's skilled hands, and her jacket was a hand-me-down from a cousin 3 years older. "No harm done," Thomas said gently. His voice was warm, without the condescending tone that Emma sometimes heard from wealthy people who occasionally visited their neighborhood as part of community service projects. "I couldn't help but notice you were looking at the cakes. Special occasion." Emma hesitated. Her mother had taught her to be cautious around strangers, but there was something trustworthy about this man's demeanor. Perhaps it was the genuine interest in his eyes, or the way he spoke to her, as if her answer truly mattered. "Tomorrow is my mom's birthday," she said quietly. "I was hoping to buy her a cake, but..." She held up the $10. The bills wrinkled from her nervous handling. "I don't have enough." Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. He had built his fortune through careful investments and strategic business decisions, accumulating wealth beyond what most people could imagine. He owned homes in 3 countries, collected rare art, and could purchase anything his heart desired without a second thought. Yet here was a child who couldn't afford a $15 cake for her mother's birthday, and her disappointment was more genuine than any emotion he had witnessed in his boardrooms in years. "What kind of cake were you hoping to buy?" he asked, stepping closer to the window. Emma pointed to a modest chocolate cake with vanilla frosting, decorated with simple pink roses. It wasn't the most elaborate cake in the display, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "That one. Mom loves chocolate, and pink is her favorite color." Thomas studied the cake, then glanced at Emma. "Tell me about your mother." The question seemed to unlock something in Emma. Her face brightened as she began to speak about Maria Rodriguez. She told Thomas about her mother's job at the diner, how she always saved the last piece of pie for customers who looked like they were having a hard day. She described her mother's singing voice, how she hummed old Spanish songs while cooking dinner, and how she never complained despite working such long hours. "She always says that everything will be okay," Emma said, her voice growing softer. "Even when I know she's worried about money or when she thinks I'm asleep and she's crying in the kitchen. She's the strongest person I know." Thomas found himself genuinely moved by Emma's devotion to her mother. In his world of corporate mergers and market analyses, he had forgotten what it felt like to witness such pure, uncomplicated love. This young girl, who clearly had so little in terms of material possessions, was wealthy in ways that Thomas had lost touch with decades ago. "How old are you, Emma?" he asked, realizing that somewhere in their conversation, she had mentioned her name. 14, she replied. "I'll be 15 in March." "And you're working to earn money for your mother's birthday?" Emma nodded. "I help Mrs. Chun at the grocery store. She lets me carry bags for elderly customers and organize the shelves. It's not much, but every little bit helps." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing what he had learned. Here was a 14-year-old girl who was working to contribute to her family's income and spending her earnings not on things for herself, but on a gift for her mother. The contrast with his own youth was stark. At 14, he had been attending an elite boarding school, concerned primarily with lacrosse matches and which university he might attend. "Emma," he said carefully, "would you allow me to help you purchase that cake?" Emma's eyes widened. "Oh, no, sir, I couldn't accept that. My mom taught me not to take charity from strangers." Thomas smiled at her response. Even in her disappointment, she maintained her dignity and her mother's teachings. "What if it wasn't charity? What if you earned it?" Emma looked puzzled. "I don't understand." Thomas glanced around the street, his mind working quickly. He spotted a small flower shop 2 doors down from the bakery. "I have a proposal for you. I need someone to help me select flowers for someone special. You seem to have good taste, and you understand what makes people happy. If you help me choose the right bouquet, I'll pay you the $5 you need to buy that cake." Emma's face showed a mixture of hope and skepticism. "You really need help picking flowers?" The truth was that Thomas had no one in his life who would appreciate flowers. His ex-wife had remarried years ago. His business associates were more likely to receive expensive wine or art pieces as gifts, and he had no close friends who would welcome such a personal gesture. But, looking at Emma's hopeful expression, he realized he was creating a truth rather than telling one. "I do," he said with conviction. "It's for someone who deserves something beautiful, and I want to make sure I choose correctly." Emma considered his offer carefully. It wasn't charity if she was working for the money, and $5 for helping someone choose flowers seemed like fair payment. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll help you." They walked together to the flower shop, their footsteps echoing on the quiet sidewalk. Thomas noticed how Emma looked at everything with curiosity and appreciation, from the carefully maintained window boxes outside the shops to the small details that he had learned to overlook in his rush through more affluent parts of the city. The flower shop was small and crowded with blooms of every color imaginable. The owner, an elderly woman with soil under her fingernails and a warm smile, greeted them as they entered. "Good afternoon," she said. "How can I help you today?" Thomas gestured to Emma. "My young consultant here is going to help me choose the perfect bouquet. Emma, what do you think would make someone feel special?" Emma walked slowly through the shop, considering the options with the seriousness of a professional. She paused at the roses, beautiful but expensive, then moved on to the daisies and carnations. Finally, she stopped at a display of mixed bouquets that combined several different flowers in harmonious arrangements. "These," she said, pointing to a bouquet that mixed pink roses with white lilies and baby's breath. "They're beautiful, but not too fancy. They say I care about you without being overwhelming." The florist nodded approvingly. "Excellent choice. That's one of our most popular arrangements." Thomas purchased the bouquet, adding a generous tip that made the florist's day. As they left the shop, he handed Emma a $5 bill. "You earned this fairly," he said. "You have good instincts about what makes people happy." Emma clutched the money tightly, her eyes shining with excitement. "Thank you so much, sir. You don't know what this means to me." But Thomas was beginning to understand exactly what it meant. As they walked back toward the bakery, He found himself thinking about the last time he had made someone genuinely happy. Not impressed, not grateful for a business opportunity, but truly, simply happy. He couldn't remember when that had been. They entered Sweet Dreams Bakery together, the bell above the door chiming to announce their arrival. Mr. Peterson looked up from behind the counter, surprised to see Emma return with such an elegantly dressed companion. "Emma, back again," he said kindly. "Have you managed to find those extra $5? "Yes, Mr. Peterson," Emma said proudly, placing her $15 on the counter. "I'd like to buy the chocolate cake with the pink roses, please." Mr. Peterson smiled as he carefully lifted the cake from the display case. "Your mother is going to love this," he said as he placed it in a white box and tied it with a pink ribbon. Emma turned to Thomas, her face glowing with happiness. "Thank you again for letting me help you. I hope whoever gets those flowers knows how lucky they are." Thomas looked down at the bouquet in his hands, then at Emma's radiant smile. "I think they will," he said quietly. As Emma carefully carried her boxed cake toward the door, Thomas made a decision that surprised him. "Emma, wait." She turned back, curious. "I wonder," Thomas said, "if you might help me with one more thing. I'm looking for a place to have dinner tomorrow evening, somewhere that serves good food and has a warm atmosphere. Do you know of any restaurants in the area you'd recommend?" Emma's face lit up. "Oh yes. My mom works at Riley's Diner on Oak Street. It's not fancy, but the food is amazing, and Mom says it's like having dinner with family. If you don't mind me asking, is it for a special occasion?" "You could say that," Thomas replied, thinking that tomorrow might indeed be more special than he had planned. "Thank you for the recommendation." They parted ways outside the bakery, Emma walking home with her precious cargo while Thomas returned to his car. His driver looked questionably at the flowers, but Thomas simply instructed him to drive to Oak Street. As they pulled up in front of Riley's Diner, Thomas studied the modest establishment through the car window. It was exactly what Emma had described, not fancy but clean and welcoming. Through the large front windows, he could see customers seated at red vinyl booths, and waitresses moving efficiently between tables with coffee pots and order pads. Thomas didn't enter the diner that day. Instead, he sat in his car for several minutes, watching the rhythm of the place, trying to imagine Emma's mother working inside. He found himself curious about Maria Rodriguez, this woman who had raised such a thoughtful daughter while working double shifts and facing financial hardship. When Thomas finally instructed his driver to take him home, he carried with Maria Rodriguez woke up on her birthday to the smell of coffee and the sound of Emma humming in the kitchen. For a moment, she allowed herself to stay in bed, listening to her daughter's voice carry the melody of an old song Maria's own mother used to sing. The happiness in Emma's voice made Maria's heart ache with both joy and worry. Emma tried so hard to take care of her, to make their small life feel complete and normal. Rising from bed, Maria wrapped her worn cotton robe around her shoulders and padded to the kitchen in her slippers. Emma stood at the counter, carefully arranging two mismatched plates and their only cloth napkins, the ones they saved for special occasions. "Happy birthday, Mama," Emma said, turning with a bright smile that lit up the small kitchen. She had managed to find a few wildflowers from the vacant lot behind their apartment building and had arranged them in a water glass as a centerpiece. "Thank you, Mija," Maria said, pulling Emma into a warm hug. "You didn't have to do anything special." "It's your birthday," Emma protested. "Of course I had to do something special. I made your favorite breakfast, and—" She paused dramatically, her eyes sparkling with barely contained excitement. "I have a surprise for later." Maria felt a familiar tug of guilt. She had been unable to take the day off work, despite it being her birthday. The diner was short-staffed, and she couldn't afford to lose the pay. She had already arranged to work both the morning and evening shifts, which meant she wouldn't be home until nearly 10 o'clock that night. "Emma, honey, you know I have to work today," Maria said gently. "Maybe we can celebrate this weekend instead?" "I know," Emma said, her smile never wavering. "That's why your surprise is for tonight, after you get home. It'll be worth the wait, I promise." They ate breakfast together, sharing stories and laughter over scrambled eggs and toast. Maria watched her daughter's animated expressions as Emma talked about her classes and her job helping Mrs. Chun. There was something extra bright about Emma this morning, an excitement that seemed to bubble just beneath the surface of their normal conversation. After breakfast, they walked to the bus stop together, as they did every morning. Maria took the bus downtown to the diner, while Emma caught a different route to her high school. As they waited, Maria noticed Emma checking her phone more frequently than usual, as if she was expecting an important message. "Everything okay, Mija?" Maria asked. "Perfect," Emma replied. "Everything's going to be perfect." At Riley's diner, Maria tied on her apron and began her shift with the usual rush of breakfast customers. She had been working at the diner for 2 years, ever since the restaurant where she had previously worked had closed unexpectedly. Despite his rough exterior, he had a soft heart, especially when it came to his employees. He had hired Maria when she desperately needed work, and he had never once complained when she occasionally needed to adjust her schedule to accommodate Emma's school events. "Happy birthday, Maria," called out Jake, one of the regular morning customers, as she refilled his coffee cup. "The kid told me it was your special day." Maria smiled and thanked him. Several other customers echoed the sentiment throughout the morning, and she realized that Emma must have mentioned her birthday to some of the regulars during her occasional visits to the diner. The thought of her daughter quietly ensuring that Maria's birthday wouldn't go completely unnoticed brought tears to her eyes. Around 11 o'clock, as the breakfast rush was winding down and Maria was preparing for the lunch crowd, Tom approached her with an unusual expression on his face. "Maria," he said, scratching his graying beard, "I just got the strangest phone call." "What kind of phone call?" Maria asked, continuing to wipe down tables. "Some guy called asking about our dinner hours and whether we take reservations. We don't usually, but he seemed particularly interested in making sure he could get a table tonight. Said he was coming on a recommendation from someone who spoke very highly of both the food and the service." Maria nodded politely, but she was puzzled. Riley's diner rarely got reservation requests. Most of their customers were neighborhood regulars who simply showed up when they were hungry. Occasionally, someone would discover them through word of mouth, but it was unusual enough to warrant Tom's attention. "Did he leave a name?" Maria asked. "Said his name was Thomas. Thomas Whitman. Name doesn't ring a bell, but he sounded like he had money, if you know what I mean. Real proper way of speaking." Maria shrugged. "Well, if he wants to try the diner, that's good for business, right?" Tom agreed. But throughout the rest of the day, Maria noticed him paying extra attention to the dinner preparations, as if he wanted to make sure everything was perfect for their unusual potential customer. The lunch rush came and went, and Maria had a brief break before the dinner shift began. She called Emma to check in, as she always did during her breaks. "How's school going, Mija?" Maria asked when Emma answered. "Great, Mama. How's your birthday so far?" "Busy but good. Everyone here has been very sweet about wishing me happy birthday. Tom even said I could have a piece of pie later." "That's wonderful," Emma said, and Maria could hear the smile in her voice. "I can't wait for you to see your surprise tonight." After hanging up, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was planning something bigger than usual. Her daughter had always been thoughtful about birthdays and holidays, making handmade cards and finding small gifts within their modest budget. But there was something different about her excitement today. The dinner shift at Riley's diner began at 4 o'clock, and Maria settled into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, serving food, and chatting with customers. The dinner crowd was different from the breakfast and lunch regulars, including more families and couples who came for the comfort food and relaxed atmosphere. Around 6:30, Maria noticed a car pull up outside that was unlike the usual vehicles in their parking lot. It was a sleek black sedan that looked expensive and out of place among the pickup trucks and economy cars that typically graced their establishment. She watched curiously as the driver got out and opened the rear door for a passenger. The man who emerged from the car was impeccably dressed in a navy coat and polished shoes. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to luxury. Maria immediately thought of Tom's earlier conversation about the reservation request. Thomas Whitman stood for a moment outside Riley's diner, taking in the honest simplicity of the establishment. The building was older, probably dating back to the 1950s, but it was well-maintained and welcoming. Through the large windows, he could see families sharing meals, couples talking over coffee, and waitresses moving efficiently between tables with friendly smiles. He had spent the day thinking about this moment, wondering if he was making a mistake by returning to the neighborhood where he had met Emma. His rational mind told him he was being foolish, that his life had no room for the complications that might arise from further involvement with this family story. But something stronger than rationality had driven him to make the reservation, to choose this particular evening to follow through on Emma's recommendation. Thomas entered the diner, and the gentle chime of the door announced his arrival. Several customers glanced up, noting his expensive attire, but the overall atmosphere remained unchanged. This was a place that welcomed everyone, regardless of their appearance or background. Tom Riley approached from behind the counter, extending his hand in greeting. "You must be Mr. Whitman. I'm Tom, the owner. Welcome to Riley's." "Thank you," Thomas replied, shaking Tom's hand. "I appreciate you accommodating my reservation request." "Not a problem at all. Right this way." Tom led Thomas to a booth near the window, one of the better tables in the modest establishment. As Thomas settled into the red vinyl seat, he found himself observing the details that Emma had mentioned: the warm atmosphere, the sense of community, the feeling that this was indeed like having dinner with family. Maria was serving a table of elderly customers when she noticed the well-dressed man being seated across the dining room. Something about him seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. She finished taking the elderly couple's dessert order and approached his table with a menu and a warm smile. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Riley's. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Thomas looked up from the menu and found himself face-to-face with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Emma. Maria Rodriguez had the same warm brown eyes as her daughter, the same genuine smile that seemed to light up her entire face. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard diner uniform with a dignity that spoke to her character. "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," Thomas said, studying Maria's face and seeing echoes of the kindness he had witnessed in Emma. As Maria poured his coffee, Thomas noticed the small details that revealed the person behind the professional demeanor. Her hands, though steady and efficient, showed the signs of hard work. Her uniform was clean and pressed, despite the long hours she had clearly been working. Most notably, there was a warmth in her interactions with other customers that suggested genuine care rather than mere professional courtesy. "Have you decided what you'd like for dinner?" Maria asked, her pen poised over her order pad. Thomas realized he had been so focused on observing Maria that he hadn't actually looked at the menu. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "I'm told this place serves exceptional comfort food." Maria's face brightened with obvious pride in her workplace. "The meatloaf is our specialty, and the chicken and dumplings is always popular. If you're looking for something lighter, the grilled salmon is excellent, and it comes with seasonal vegetables and rice." "The meatloaf sounds perfect," Thomas decided. "And perhaps you could tell me, do you have a daughter named Emma?" Maria's expression shifted to one of surprise and slight concern. "Yes, I do. How do you know Emma?" Thomas smiled reassuringly. "We met yesterday outside Sweet Dreams Bakery. She helped me choose flowers for someone special, and she spoke so fondly of this place and of you. I hope you don't mind that I decided to try your recommendation." Relief washed over Maria's features, followed by curiosity. "She helped you choose flowers? That sounds like Emma. She has a good eye for what makes people happy." "She does indeed," Thomas agreed. "She told me that today is your birthday." "Happy birthday, Mrs. Rodriguez." Maria blushed slightly, pleased that Emma had thought to mention her birthday to this kind stranger. "Thank you. That's very sweet of you to remember. It's not every day you meet someone who speaks about their mother with such obvious love and admiration," Thomas said. "Emma made quite an impression on me." As Maria went to place his order with the kitchen, Thomas found himself thinking about the connection between this warm, hard-working woman and the thoughtful girl he had met the previous day. It was clear that Emma's character was a reflection of her mother's influence, and Thomas felt a deep respect for Maria's ability to raise such a remarkable daughter despite their obvious financial struggles. Throughout the evening, Thomas observed Maria as she worked. He watched her check on elderly customers to make sure they were comfortable, laugh at a regular customer's familiar joke, and patiently take a complicated order from a large family with young children. Every interaction demonstrated the same kindness and genuine care that he had witnessed in Emma. When Maria brought his meal, Thomas complimented the food and engaged her in brief conversation during the quieter moments of her shift. He learned that she had been born in Mexico but had lived in the United States since childhood, that she had always worked in restaurants because she enjoyed taking care of people, and that Emma was her greatest pride and joy. She wants to go to college, Maria said during one of these conversations, her voice filled with both hope and worry. She's so smart, and she works so hard. I just want to make sure she has every opportunity. Thomas heard the unspoken concern in Maria's voice about the financial challenges of sending Emma to college. He thought about the cost of his own education, paid for without question by parents who considered it a natural right rather than a financial burden. As the evening progressed, Thomas found himself lingering over his meal, ordering dessert, and then coffee, reluctant to end this glimpse into a life so different from his own. The diner's atmosphere was everything Emma had described: warm, welcoming, and filled with the kind of authentic human connections that Thomas had been missing without even realizing it. Around 9:30, as the dinner crowd began to thin out, Thomas asked for his check. Maria brought it to him with a smile that seemed slightly tired but still genuinely warm. "Thank you for coming in," she said. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." "More than you know," Thomas replied truthfully. As he reached for his wallet, he made a decision that felt both impulsive and completely right. He left a tip that was larger than the cost of the entire meal, tucking the bills discreetly under his coffee cup. After Thomas left, Maria cleared his table and discovered the generous tip. For a moment, she simply stared at the money, overwhelmed by the stranger's kindness. The tip was more than she typically made in tips during an entire shift, and she thought about all the things this unexpected windfall could help with: Emma's school supplies, their overdue electric bill, maybe even a small treat for her daughter. She looked out the window and saw the black sedan pulling away from the parking lot. Something about the encounter with Thomas Whitman had felt significant, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. He had been kind and respectful, clearly well-educated and wealthy, but there had been something else, a quality of genuine interest in her and Emma's lives that had surprised her. As her shift ended and she prepared to go home, Maria felt a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with the generous tip, though she was certainly grateful for it. There was something uplifting about the reminder that kindness existed in unexpected places and that Emma's naturally friendly nature had led to this pleasant encounter. The bus ride home gave Maria time to reflect on her birthday. It had been a good day, filled with small kindnesses from coworkers and customers, capped by the unexpected pleasure of meeting someone who had been touched by Emma's thoughtfulness. As the bus approached their neighborhood, Maria found herself looking forward to Emma's mysterious surprise, curious about what her daughter had planned. Meanwhile, Emma was putting the finishing touches on her birthday surprise. She had spent the afternoon carefully decorating their small living room with handmade paper flowers and had set the kitchen table with their best dishes. The birthday cake sat in the center of the table, its pink roses glowing in the soft light of the candles Emma had arranged around it. Emma checked the clock nervously. Her mother would be home any minute, and she wanted everything to be perfect. She had invited Mrs. Chun from the grocery store to join them for cake, knowing that her mother enjoyed the older woman's company and stories about her travels in China before immigrating to America. When Maria's key turned in the lock, Emma quickly lit the candles on the cake and called out, "Mama, come to the kitchen." Maria entered their apartment calling Emma's name, and stopped short when 3 weeks after Maria's birthday, Thomas Whitman found himself taking the detour through Maple Street more frequently than he cared to admit. He told himself it was simply a more scenic route, avoiding the congestion of the main highways. But the truth was more complicated. Something about that neighborhood, about the genuine human connections he had witnessed there, drew him back repeatedly. His driver, Marcus, had stopped commenting on the route changes, though Thomas occasionally caught him glancing in the rearview mirror with a knowing expression. Marcus had been with Thomas for 5 years and had learned to navigate his employer's moods and preferences without question. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Thomas noticed unusual activity outside Sweet Dreams Bakery. A small crowd had gathered, and through the window, He could see Mr. Peterson gesturing animatedly to a man in a business suit. Thomas instructed Marcus to park, and he approached the bakery to investigate. "Excuse me," Thomas said to a woman standing near the edge of the crowd. "What's happening here?" The woman, whom Thomas recognized as someone who worked at the nearby flower shop, looked worried. "The building's been sold," she explained. "The new owner wants to tear down this whole block and put up condominiums. All the businesses have to be out by the end of next month." Thomas felt a surprising jolt of concern. This block of modest shops had become oddly important to him over the past few weeks. Not just Sweet Dreams Bakery, but the flower shop where Emma had helped him, Mrs. Chin's grocery store where Emma worked, and several other small businesses that served the neighborhood's daily needs. He approached Mr. Peterson, who was standing outside his bakery looking defeated. The older man's usually cheerful demeanor had been replaced by an expression of exhaustion and worry. "Mr. Peterson," Thomas said, extending his hand. "I'm Thomas Whitman. I've been a customer here recently." Mr. Peterson shook his hand absently. "Oh yes, I remember you. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman, but I'm afraid we'll be closing soon. The new owner wants to redevelop the property." "How long have you had the bakery?" Thomas asked. 23 years, Mr. Peterson replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "My wife and I started this place when we were newlyweds. She passed away 2 years ago, and now—" He gestured helplessly at the building. "I guess it's the end of an era." Thomas looked at the bakery window where he had first seen Emma, then at the other businesses along the block. An idea began to form in his mind, one that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. "Mr. Peterson, who purchased the building?" "Some development company. Morrison Holdings, I think. They've been buying up properties all along this street." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Morrison Holdings was a company he knew well from his business dealings. More importantly, it was a company that could be influenced by the right financial incentives. That evening, Thomas sat in his home office making phone calls and reviewing financial documents. His assistant had long since gone home, but Thomas worked late into the night, researching Morrison Holdings and their development plans for Maple Street. What he discovered both concerned and motivated him. Morrison Holdings was planning to tear down not just the block containing Sweet Dreams Bakery, but several blocks in the surrounding area. The development would displace dozens of small businesses and force many families to relocate to find affordable housing. Among those who would be affected, Thomas realized, were Emma and Maria. Their apartment building was in the second phase of the development project. The next morning, Thomas canceled his regular Friday meetings and drove to Morrison Holdings' downtown office. He had done business with the company's president, Richard Morrison, on several occasions, though they moved in different social circles. Morrison's secretary announced Thomas's arrival, and within minutes, he was seated in Morrison's spacious office overlooking the city. "Thomas Whitman," Morrison said with the broad smile of someone who recognized a potential business opportunity. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to see me?" "I understand you've acquired some properties on Maple Street," Thomas said, getting straight to the point. "I'm interested in discussing those holdings." Morrison's smile widened. "Ah, you've heard about our new residential project. It's going to be quite spectacular. Luxury condominiums with all the modern amenities, completely transforming that tired old neighborhood. What would it take for you to reconsider that particular development?" Thomas asked. Morrison looked puzzled. "Reconsider?" "Thomas, that's a multi-million-dollar project. We've already invested significantly in the planning and permits. I'm prepared to make you an offer that would compensate for your investment and provide a substantial profit," Thomas said calmly. For the next hour, the two men negotiated. Morrison was initially skeptical, unable to understand why Thomas would want to interfere with a profitable development. But as Thomas's offers increased, skepticism gave way to interest. Finally, they reached an agreement. Thomas would purchase all of Morrison Holdings' properties on Maple Street for significantly more than the company had paid for them, along with compensation for their planning costs. In return, Morrison would abandon the development project and transfer all properties to Thomas within 30 days. As Thomas signed the preliminary agreements, Morrison couldn't resist asking, "What exactly do you plan to do with those properties, Thomas?" "They're not exactly in your usual investment category." Thomas smiled. "I'm going to do something completely different with them." That afternoon, Thomas returned to Maple Street, but this time with a purpose beyond mere observation. He visited each business on the block, introducing himself to owners he hadn't yet met, and learning about their situations. At Mrs. Chin's grocery store, he discovered that the elderly Chinese woman had been struggling to keep her business afloat even before the development threat. Her customers were loyal, but there weren't enough of them to sustain the store's overhead costs. At the flower shop, he learned that the owner, Mrs. Martinez, had been considering retirement, but couldn't afford to close the shop that provided her only income. Each story added depth to Thomas's understanding of the community that had somehow captured his attention. These weren't just businesses facing displacement. They were the foundation of a neighborhood's daily life. When he stopped by Riley's diner, Tom Riley greeted him warmly. "Mr. Whitman, good to see you again. Maria's not working today, but she'll be sorry she missed you." "Actually," Thomas said, "I was hoping to speak with you about the building situation." Tom's expression darkened. "You heard about that, huh? It's a real shame. This place has been here for 40 years, and now some developer wants to tear it down for fancy condos that nobody in this neighborhood could afford. What if I told you that might not happen?" Thomas said carefully. Tom studied him with sharp eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've purchased the properties from Morrison Holdings. The development has been canceled." Tom stared at him for several seconds, processing the information. "You bought the whole block?" "I did. And I'm hoping to keep all the businesses operating as they are." Tom sat down heavily in the nearest booth, looking stunned. "Why would you do that?" "I mean, no offense, but you don't seem like the type to get sentimental about old neighborhoods." Thomas considered the question seriously. How could he explain that a chance encounter with a 14-year-old girl had somehow changed his perspective on what constituted a valuable investment? "Let's just say I've learned to appreciate what this neighborhood represents," Thomas said finally. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas worked with lawyers and financial advisors to structure a plan for the Maple Street properties. Rather than acting as a traditional landlord, he established a community trust that would maintain affordable rent for the businesses and ensure their long-term stability. The plan required significant financial investment from Thomas, not just for the property purchase, but for building improvements and ongoing subsidies to keep the rents manageable. His business advisors thought he had lost his mind. "Thomas," his financial advisor said during one meeting, "this is essentially a massive charitable donation disguised as a business investment. There's no way you'll see a return on this money." "That depends on how you define return," Thomas replied. Emma first learned about the changes coming to their neighborhood when she arrived at Sweet Dreams Bakery to find Mr. Peterson practically dancing behind his counter. "Emma," he called out when he saw her, "have you heard the wonderful news?" "What news, Mr. Peterson?" "We're not closing. Someone bought the building from the developers and wants us to stay. Not just us, but all the businesses on the block." Emma felt a surge of relief and joy. She had been dreading the closure of the bakery, not just because she had come to associate it with her mother's special birthday, but because Mr. Peterson had become like a grandfather figure to her during her frequent visits to admire the cakes she couldn't afford. "Who bought it?" Emma asked. "Some businessman. Very generous man, apparently. He's not even raising our rent." Emma walked home that afternoon with a spring in her step, excited to share the good news with her mother. When she arrived at their apartment, she found Maria sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in her hands and tears on her cheeks. "Mama, what's wrong?" Emma asked, immediately concerned. Maria looked up with an expression that mixed confusion with amazement. "Mija, I received the strangest letter today." She handed Emma an envelope addressed to Maria Rodriguez in formal business letterhead. The letter inside was brief but extraordinary. "Dear Ms. Rodriguez, I am writing to inform you that your apartment building has recently come under new ownership as part of a community development initiative. Effective immediately, your rent will be reduced to $200 per month to better reflect affordable housing standards for working families. Additionally, I would like to discuss a business opportunity that might interest you. I am looking to invest in a small restaurant venture and would welcome the chance to discuss your potential involvement as a partner and manager. Please contact my office at your convenience to arrange a meeting. Sincerely, Thomas Whitman, Whitman Enterprises." Emma read the letter twice, her eyes growing wider with each reading. "Mama, this is incredible. But who is Thomas Whitman?" Maria shook her head. I've never heard of him, though the name sounds familiar somehow. Emma studied the letter again, focusing on the name. Suddenly, her memory clicked into place. Mama, I think this might be the man who helped me buy your birthday cake. The one who needed help choosing flowers. His name was Thomas. Maria looked at her daughter with surprise. The gentleman you met at the bakery? But why would he? She trailed off as the implications began to sink in. If this was the same Thomas who had visited Riley's diner on her birthday, then his interest in their neighborhood and their family was more than coincidental. He came to the diner that night, Maria said slowly. He said you had recommended it. He was very kind, very generous with his tip. Emma and Maria spent the evening trying to piece together the puzzle of Thomas Whitman's sudden involvement in their lives. They couldn't understand why a wealthy businessman would take such personal interest in their welfare, but they couldn't deny the evidence of his generosity. 3 days later, Maria gathered the courage to call the number on Thomas's business card. His assistant scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon at a coffee shop near Riley's diner. Maria arrived at the meeting nervous but curious. She had dressed in her best clothes, a simple black dress that she usually wore to church, and had spent extra time on her appearance. Thomas was already seated at a corner table when she arrived, and he stood politely as she approached. The coffee shop was quiet and comfortable, providing a neutral space for their conversation. Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you for coming, Thomas said, pulling out her chair. I hope you don't mind meeting here rather than in a formal office. This is fine, Maria replied, still uncertain about the purpose of the meeting. Thomas ordered coffee for both of them and then settled back in his chair, studying Maria with the same genuine interest she remembered from his visit to the diner. I imagine you're curious about my letter, he said. Very curious, Maria admitted. I don't understand why someone I barely know would want to help my family. Thomas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Mrs. Rodriguez, when I met your daughter, she made quite an impression on me. In a very brief conversation, she demonstrated more kindness and thoughtfulness than I encounter in most of my business dealings. It made me curious about the family that had raised such a remarkable young woman. Maria felt a flush of pride at the praise for Emma, but she remained cautious. That's very kind of you to say, but I still don't understand. When I visited your diner, I had the opportunity to observe you as well. Thomas continued. I saw how you treated every customer with genuine care, how you took pride in your work despite difficult circumstances. It reminded me of values I had forgotten in my pursuit of financial success. He paused to sip his coffee, then continued. The truth is, Mrs. Rodriguez, my life has been very successful by conventional measures, but quite empty in terms of human connection. Meeting you and Emma reminded me of what I've been missing. Maria listened carefully, beginning to understand that this conversation was as important to Thomas as it was to her. The restaurant opportunity one mentioned, Thomas said, is something I've been thinking about seriously. I believe there's room in this city for an establishment that serves excellent food in a warm, family atmosphere. Based on what I observed at Riley's, I think you have the skills and temperament to make such a restaurant very successful. You want me to manage a restaurant for you? Maria asked. I want you to be my partner, Thomas corrected. I would provide the initial investment and handle the business aspects, while you would manage operations and maintain the atmosphere that makes a restaurant special. Over time, you would have the opportunity to buy out my share and own the restaurant completely. Maria stared at him, overwhelmed by the scope of what he was offering. It was beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. Why? She asked simply. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Thomas smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, Maria saw genuine warmth rather than polite courtesy in his expression. Because, Mrs. Rodriguez, I've learned that the best investments aren't always the ones that provide the highest financial returns. Sometimes the most valuable investments are the ones that give you back something you didn't even realize you had lost. As they talked through the afternoon, Maria began to understand that Thomas was offering more than a business opportunity. He was offering hope for a future that would allow her to provide for Emma's education and give them both a chance at financial stability they had never imagined possible. But more than that, she sensed that Thomas was seeking something as well, something that had been missing from his successful but solitary life. Their conversation felt like the beginning of a friendship that could benefit them both in ways that had nothing to do with money. When Maria returned home that evening, she sat Emma down at their kitchen 6 months after their first meeting at the coffee shop. Maria Rodriguez stood in the kitchen of Casa Corazon, the restaurant she now managed and partially owned, directing the dinner preparations with confident authority. The transformation from struggling single mother to successful restaurateur still felt surreal to her. But the evidence was undeniable. Reservations were booked weeks in advance. Food critics had praised their authentic Mexican cuisine. And, most importantly, she was finally able to provide Emma with the opportunities she had always dreamed of giving her daughter. The restaurant itself was a testament to the thoughtful partnership between Maria and Thomas. Located in a beautifully renovated building just 3 blocks from their original neighborhood, Casa Corazon combined elegant ambience with the warm, welcoming atmosphere that had made Riley's diner special. Maria had insisted on hiring several employees from the diner, including 2 waitresses who had been like family to her, and Tom Riley himself had become their weekend breakfast chef, delighting in the chance to create more elaborate dishes than the diner's simple menu had allowed. Thomas had proven to be an ideal business partner, providing financial backing and handling administrative details while allowing Maria complete creative control over the restaurant's character and operations. Their relationship had evolved from cautious business association to genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values that neither had expected to find in the other. This evening was special beyond the usual busy Friday night dinner service. Emma's acceptance letter to Northwestern University had arrived that morning, along with notification of a full academic scholarship that would cover not only tuition but room and board as well. The scholarship had been established by an anonymous donor specifically for students from their area who demonstrated both academic excellence and community leadership. Emma had spent the afternoon crying happy tears and calling everyone she knew to share the news. Mrs. Chun had closed her grocery store early to join the celebration. Mr. Peterson had contributed a spectacular congratulations cake, and even Tom Riley had agreed to work an extra shift so he could be part of the festivities. But the person Emma most wanted to thank was Thomas, who had arrived at the restaurant an hour before opening to join the family celebration. Over the months of their partnership, he had become a beloved figure in their lives, attending Emma's school events when Maria couldn't get away from work, helping her with college applications, and providing the kind of stable male presence that had been missing since her father's departure. "Mr. Thomas," Emma said, approaching him where he stood reviewing reservation lists with Maria, "I still can't believe this is really happening. Northwestern University, and with a full scholarship." Thomas smiled at Emma's excitement, remembering the shy 14-year-old who had been counting crumpled dollar bills outside a bakery window just 7 months earlier. The confident young woman before him was already showing signs of the leader she would become, having organized fundraising drives at her high school and volunteer programs in their neighborhood. "You earned every bit of this opportunity, Emma," Thomas said warmly. "Your academic record and community involvement made you an ideal candidate for any scholarship program." Emma hugged him impulsively, something she had started doing as their relationship had deepened from formal acquaintance to surrogate family. "I know you had something to do with this scholarship, even if you won't admit it." Thomas maintained the innocent expression he had perfected whenever Emma made such accusations, though Maria noticed the slight smile that suggested Emma's suspicions were correct. She had learned to recognize the signs of Thomas's anonymous generosity, from mysteriously affordable tuition at Emma's private high school to the sudden appearance of need-based assistance programs in their community. The evening service at Casa Corazon proceeded smoothly, with the satisfaction that came from well-trained staff and carefully prepared dishes. Maria moved through the dining room, checking on tables and greeting regular customers who had become like extended family. She paused frequently to accept congratulations on Emma's scholarship, proudly sharing her daughter's achievement with anyone who would listen. Around 8 o'clock, during a brief lull between the early and late dinner crowds, Thomas found Maria in the kitchen reviewing order tickets. "Maria," he said, "could we talk privately for a few minutes?" Something in his tone made Maria look up with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Thomas assured her. "I just have something I'd like to discuss with you." They walked to Maria's small office behind the kitchen, a space that had become her sanctuary for handling the business aspects of restaurant management. Thomas closed the door and took a seat across from her desk, his expression serious but not troubled. "Maria, I want to talk to you about the future," Thomas began. "Both the restaurant's future and your family's future." Maria nodded, giving him her full attention. "When we started this partnership, I told you that eventually you would have the opportunity to buy out my share and own the restaurant completely. I think it's time to make that transition." Maria felt a jolt of panic. "Thomas, if I've done something wrong, or if you're unhappy with how things are going." "No," Thomas interrupted, smiling at her concern. "Quite the opposite. You've exceeded every expectation I had when we started this venture. Casa Corazon is successful because of your vision and management. It should belong to you completely. I can't afford to buy out your investment," Maria said quietly. "The restaurant is doing well, but not well enough for me to secure that kind of loan." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. "Actually, you can afford it, because I'm selling my share to you for exactly $1. Maria stared at him, not comprehending what he was saying. "Thomas, that's impossible. Your initial investment was over $200,000, which has already been returned to me many times over," Thomas said gently. "This restaurant has given me something far more valuable than money, Maria. It's given me purpose, family, and the satisfaction of watching dreams come true." He placed the envelope on her desk. "Inside are all the legal documents transferring my ownership to you, along with a financial gift that will ensure Emma's college expenses are completely covered, even beyond what her scholarship provides." Maria opened the envelope with trembling hands and found herself looking at legal documents that would make her the sole owner of Casa Corazon, along with a bank check for an amount that made her gasp aloud. "I can't accept this," she said, tears starting to flow. "It's too much. You've already done too much for us." Thomas reached across the desk and gently took her hands in his. "Maria, do you remember what I told you that first day in the coffee shop? About the best investments being the ones that give you back something you didn't know you had lost." Maria nodded, unable to speak. "This restaurant, this partnership with you and Emma, has given me back the ability to feel like my life matters beyond making money. You've given me a family when I thought I would always be alone. You've shown me what it means to build something meaningful." He paused, allowing her to absorb his words. "I'm 63 years old, Maria. I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But until I met you and Emma, I had no real purpose for any of it. Watching Emma grow into the remarkable young woman she's become, seeing you build this restaurant into something that serves your community, being part of a family again, these experiences are worth more than any business deal I've ever made." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, overwhelmed by his generosity and the genuine emotion in his voice. "What will you do now?" she asked. Thomas smiled. "I'm going to continue being part of this family, if you'll have me. I'm going to be the proudest grandfather figure in the audience when Emma graduates from Northwestern. I'm going to be a regular customer at Casa Corazon, probably too often for your own good. And I'm going to find other ways to make investments that matter." He stood up, preparing to leave her alone to process what had happened. "There's one more thing," he said, turning back from the door. "I've established a foundation to provide scholarships and small business loans in this community. I was hoping you might consider serving on the board of directors." After Thomas left her office, Maria sat alone for several minutes, staring at the documents that had just changed her life forever. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the struggling waitress who could barely afford her rent to the restaurant owner who would be able to provide her daughter with every opportunity. But more than the financial transformation, she thought about the unexpected friendship that had developed between her family and this lonely billionaire who had somehow found healing through helping others heal. She understood now that his generosity came not from pity but from genuine love, the kind of love that develops between people who recognize goodness in each other. When Maria emerged from her office, she found the restaurant in full swing for the late dinner crowd. Emma was helping to seat customers, chatting easily with regular patrons who had watched her grow up over the past months. Thomas was at his usual table near the kitchen, reviewing financial reports while sipping coffee and occasionally offering advice to staff members who had come to view him as part of the restaurant's extended family. "Mama," Emma said, approaching with obvious curiosity about the private meeting. "Is everything okay? You look like you've been crying." Maria pulled her daughter into a hug, holding her tightly as she tried to find words for what had just occurred. "Mija," she said finally, "we need to talk after we close tonight. About Northwestern, about the restaurant, about how blessed we are to have Thomas in our lives." As the evening continued, Maria found herself observing Thomas with new eyes. She watched him interact with their customers, offering encouragement to the young server who was still learning the dinner routine, complimenting the chef on a particularly well-prepared dish, and listening patiently to Mrs. Chin's stories about her grandchildren in California. This was not the behavior of a wealthy man seeking tax advantages or social recognition for his charitable giving. This was someone who had found genuine happiness in being part of a community, someone who had learned that the best way to heal his own loneliness was to help others achieve their dreams. Around 10 o'clock, as the last customers were finishing their meals, Thomas approached Maria at the reception desk, where she was organizing the evening's receipts. "I should be heading home," he said. "Thank you for letting me be part of Emma's celebration tonight." "Thomas," Maria said, looking up from her paperwork, "thank you for everything. Not just tonight, not just the restaurant, but for believing in us when we couldn't even believe in ourselves." Thomas smiled, the genuine smile that had replaced his polite business expression over the months of their friendship. "Maria, I should be thanking you. When I met Emma outside that bakery, I was a successful but empty man who had forgotten what it felt like to care about something beyond profit margins. Your family taught me that the most important investments are the ones you make in people's dreams." After Thomas left, Maria and Emma worked together to close the restaurant, a routine they had established early in their partnership. As they cleaned tables and prepared for the next day's service, Emma peppered her mother with questions about the private meeting. Finally, sitting together in the quiet dining room with only the security lights providing illumination, Maria showed Emma the documents that would make them the sole owners of Casa Corazon. "Mama," Emma whispered, staring at the papers, "he's giving us the restaurant." "He says it was always meant to be ours," Maria replied. "That he was just helping us get to where we belonged." Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of Thomas's gift. "He's like the grandfather I never had," she said finally. "Not because of his money, but because of how much he cares about us." Maria nodded, thinking about how naturally Thomas had filled the role of family patriarch, attending school events, offering guidance on college decisions, and providing the kind of stability that had been missing from their lives for so long. "What do we do now, Mama?" Emma asked. Maria looked around the restaurant that had become their life's work, thinking about the future that was now completely within their control. "Now, Mija, we make this place everything we dreamed it could be. We serve our community, we provide good jobs for our employees, and we make Thomas proud of his investment in our family." As they prepared to leave that night, Emma paused at the front door of Casa Corazon, looking back at the dining room where so many dreams had already come true. "Mama," she said, "do you think we'll ever be able to help someone else the way Thomas has helped us?" Maria smiled, thinking about the foundation Thomas had mentioned and the opportunities that lay ahead. "I think that's exactly what he's hoping we'll do, Emma. I think that's the point of all of this." 2 years later, Emma Rodriguez stood at the podium in Northwestern University's graduate. She had organized tutoring programs for underprivileged students, established a scholarship fund for students from her old neighborhood, and spent her summers working at Casa Corazon while developing business plans for other community-focused restaurants. Her senior thesis had examined the economic impact of small business development in low-income communities, using Casa Corazon as a case study for how strategic investment could create lasting positive change. The paper had been so well received that she had already been offered positions at several nonprofit organizations and social impact investment firms. After the ceremony, the Rodriguez family celebration moved to Casa Corazon, which Maria had closed for the evening to host a private party for Emma's graduation. The restaurant had continued to thrive, earning recognition as one of the city's best establishments while maintaining its commitment to serving the local community. Thomas had remained a constant presence in their lives, becoming the grandfather figure Emma had never had, and the business mentor Maria relied on for major decisions. His own transformation over the past 2 years had been as dramatic as theirs, though less visible to outside observers. The Whitman Foundation, which he had established with Maria serving as board president and Emma as youth coordinator, had provided scholarships to over 300 students and small business loans to 50 entrepreneurs. Thomas spent his days reviewing grant applications, visiting scholarship recipients, and meeting with young people who reminded him daily of why his wealth mattered. His personal life had changed as well. The penthouse apartment had been replaced by a modest home in Maria and Emma's neighborhood, close enough to Casa Corazon that he could walk there for his daily coffee. His social circle now consisted primarily of scholarship recipients, small business owners, and community activists rather than fellow wealthy executives. "Thomas," Emma said, approaching him during the graduation party while he was deep in conversation with several of her college friends about their post-graduation plans. "Can I steal you away for a minute?" They stepped out onto the restaurant's small patio, where strings of lights created a warm glow against the evening sky. Emma had inherited her mother's ability to create beauty in simple spaces, and the patio reflected her touch in its carefully arranged plants and comfortable seating. "I have something for you," Emma said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. Thomas looked surprised. "Emma, this is your graduation day. I should be giving gifts to you." "You've already given me everything," Emma replied. "This is just a small token of appreciation." Thomas unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound photo album. The first page contained the picture that had been taken the day he first visited Casa Corazon, showing him, Maria, and Emma standing together in front of the restaurant sign. The subsequent pages documented their journey together: Emma's high school graduation, the opening night of Casa Corazon's expansion, Thomas's 60th birthday celebration, and dozens of smaller moments that had marked their transformation from strangers to family. On the final page was a letter in Emma's handwriting. "Dear Thomas, when I was 14 years old, I thought the most important thing was having enough money to buy my mother a birthday cake. You taught me that the most important thing is actually having people in your life who care about your happiness and who give you opportunities to care about theirs. You didn't just help me buy a cake that day. You showed me what it looks like when someone chooses to invest in other people's dreams instead of just their own profits. You've been the best grandfather, business mentor, and family friend that anyone could ask for. I'm starting a new job next month with the Chicago Community Development Corporation. My role will be to identify and support small businesses in underserved neighborhoods, helping entrepreneurs access the capital and mentorship they need to succeed. I chose this career because of what I learned from watching you and Mama build something beautiful together. I want to spend my life creating opportunities for other families to discover what's possible when someone believes in them. Thank you for being the person who taught me that success is only meaningful when it's shared. Love always, Emma." Thomas closed the album and looked up to find Emma watching him with a mixture of nervousness and hope. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me. You deserve to see how much your kindness has meant to our family," Emma said. "And I want you to know that every person I'm able to help in my new job will be, in some way, a continuation of what you started when you helped me that day at the bakery." They were interrupted by Maria calling from inside the restaurant. "Emma, Thomas, come in. We're about to cut the cake." The cake was, appropriately, from Sweet Dreams Bakery. Mr. Peterson had insisted on creating something special for Emma's graduation, and the result was a work of art that captured the restaurant's atmosphere in sugar and frosting. Tiny fondant figures represented Emma's journey from high school to college, with the restaurant serving as the centerpiece that had made it all possible. As the celebration continued into the evening, Thomas found himself reflecting on the unexpected path his life had taken. 2 years earlier, he had been a successful but isolated businessman whose primary concerns were market fluctuations and investment returns. Tonight, he was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him not because of his wealth, but because of the man he had chosen to become. The restaurant was filled with scholarship recipients who had become like additional family members, small business owners who had succeeded with foundation support, and community members who had watched Emma grow up and were celebrating her achievements as if she were their own daughter. Mrs. Chun, now in her 70s but still running her grocery store with the help of foundation-funded improvements, approached Thomas with a cup of tea and a warm smile. "Mr. Thomas," she said in her careful English, "you have made many dreams come true. But I think maybe Maria and Emma's dreams came true for you too, yes?" Thomas accepted the tea and considered her observation. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Chun. I spent most of my life accumulating things I thought would make me happy, but I never understood what happiness actually felt like until I met this family." Around midnight, as the last guests were leaving and the restaurant was being cleaned for the next day's service, Emma found Thomas helping Maria stack chairs on tables. "You don't have to help with cleanup," Maria protested. "This is Emma's graduation night. You should be celebrating, not working." "This is celebrating," Thomas replied. "Being part of this family, being included in the work as well as the joy. This is what I've been missing all my life." As they worked together, Emma shared her plans for her new job and her longer-term goals of someday opening a chain of community-focused restaurants similar to Casa Corazon. Thomas listened with the pride of a parent whose child has exceeded every expectation. "I have an idea," Thomas said as they finished their work. "What would you think about the foundation creating a restaurant development program? We could provide seed money and mentorship for entrepreneurs who want to create establishments like Casa Corazon in their own communities." Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "You mean help other families have the as they walked home through the neighborhood that had become a symbol of possibility rather than limitation?" Maria reflected on the unexpected ways that life could change. 7 months ago, she had been a struggling single mother whose biggest concern was whether Emma would be able to attend college. Tonight, she was a business owner whose daughter had a full scholarship to one of the country's best universities. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't financial. It was the creation of a family where none had existed before, the healing of a lonely man's heart through service to others, and the discovery that sometimes the most unlikely people can become the most important relationships in your life. Thomas Whitman drove home that night feeling a satisfaction that had nothing to do with business success. Tomorrow, he would begin working on the foundation that would carry forward the lessons he had learned from Maria and Emma. He would look for other young people who needed just a small opportunity to change their lives, other families who deserved a chance to achieve their dreams. As he had told Maria, his investments had finally begun to pay returns that mattered, not in dollars, but in the knowledge that his wealth could be a force for genuine good in the world, creating opportunities for others to discover their own potential for greatness. The chance encounter outside a bakery window had taught him that sometimes the most valuable things in life cost exactly $10 and a willingness to care about someone else's happiness. Everything that followed was simply interest on that original investment. End table and shared everything Thomas had told her. Together, they tried to process the magnitude of the opportunity and what it might mean for their future. "Do you trust him, Mama?" Emma asked. Maria considered the question carefully. "I think I do, Mija. There's something about him that seems lonely, like he's been successful but not happy. Maybe helping us helps him too." As they talked late into the night, neither Maria nor Emma could have imagined how dramatically their lives were about to change, or how their small act of kindness in helping Thomas choose flowers had set in motion a series of events that would transform not only their future, but his as well. She saw the transformed space. The paper flowers, the carefully set table, the beautiful birthday cake with its flickering candles, all spoke to hours of preparation and thoughtfulness. "Emma," Maria gasped, tears immediately filling her eyes. Where did you get such a beautiful cake?" Emma's face glowed with triumph and joy. "I saved my money from helping Mrs. Chun, and yesterday I met this really nice man who helped me earn the last $5 I needed. Mama, I wanted to give you something special because you worked so hard for us." Maria pulled Emma into a fierce hug, overwhelmed by her daughter's sacrifice and love. The cake was more beautiful than anything she had ever expected to receive, but more than that, it represented Emma's determination to make her mother's birthday memorable. As they sat together to share the cake, with Mrs. Chen joining them with stories and laughter, Maria thought about the day's events. The kindness of strangers, the love of her daughter, the simple pleasure of chocolate cake shared with people who cared about her, all combined to make this birthday one she would always remember. Thomas Whitman, driving through the night toward his empty penthouse, found himself thinking about the warmth he had witnessed at Riley's diner and wondering what Emma and Maria were doing at that very moment. He had no way of knowing that his small act of kindness the day before had helped create exactly the kind of birthday celebration that Maria deserved. But somehow, he felt that his evening had been as meaningful as theirs. Not just the bouquet Emma had helped him choose, but something else, something he hadn't expected to find on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He carried the memory of genuine human connection, of a brief conversation that had reminded him of values he had forgotten in his pursuit of success. That evening, in his spacious penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Thomas found himself thinking about Emma's words. "She's the strongest person I know," the girl had said about her mother. And Thomas wondered when someone had last spoken about him with such admiration and love. He placed the bouquet in a crystal vase and set it on his dining room table, where it provided the only splash of color in the otherwise monochrome space. Tomorrow, he decided, he would indeed have dinner at Riley's diner. He told himself it was simply to try Emma's recommendation, but, deep down, he knew his motivation was more complex than that. As he prepared for bed that night, Thomas Whitman felt something he hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for the next day that had nothing to do with business meetings or financial reports. Instead, he was looking forward to discovering what other surprises life might hold when he allowed himself to notice the human stories unfolding around him. Meanwhile, across town in the small apartment she shared with her mother, Emma carefully hid the cake box in their tiny pantry, covering it with a kitchen towel to keep it safe until tomorrow. She had managed to surprise her mother with gifts before, small tokens bought with carefully saved allowance money, but never anything as special as a real birthday cake from Sweet Dreams Bakery. As she lay in bed that night, Emma thought about the kind stranger who had helped her make her mother's birthday wish come true. She wondered about the flowers he had bought and who would receive them. There had been something lonely about him despite his expensive clothes and quiet confidence, something that reminded Emma of how her mother looked sometimes when she thought no one was watching. Emma fell asleep hoping that whoever received those beautiful flowers would appreciate the kindness of the man who had given them, just as she would never forget the kindness he had shown her.